The radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Friday, October 25th. I hope everybody's having a phenomenal week, and that you're all looking forward to a amazing weekend. I'm looking forward to it. I need a rest. I don't know. Body is sending weird messages. You need a rest, Yaron. You're not getting enough rest. I'm not sure exactly what's going on, but I plan to, maybe I just need to spend a day in bed or something. I don't know. Anyway, we're going to cover a few things today in anticipation of Israel's attack on Iran, which rumors suggest is going to happen any minute now. Maybe is, of course, ongoing. But, of course, we've been disappointed before. I thought we'd cover kind of where we are with regard to Israel's war. And maybe this time I'll be a little less positive than I have been in the past, and discuss kind of the failures, some big failures that I think, strategic failures that have to do with Israel's wars, and we'll see what happens tonight or whenever Israel actually attacks Iran. I also thought we talk quickly, about China's economy, Europe's economy, the U.S.'s economy, maybe in total, relatively speaking, how they're doing, and so on. So we'll talk a little bit about economics and where the various economies are doing. Again, it's election season, so it's really hard to get any news other than election news, which is mainly right now pretty boring. Although, again, as the trickling happens, it does seem more and more favorable to a Trump victory. I didn't want to comment on something I commented yesterday, but it popped up again on my feed, and Trump again mentioned this, and this was the news item. It said, Trump flirts with the ultimate tax cut. No income taxes at all. Trump's nostalgia for 19th century tariffs has alarming implications for the world. Okay, that's somebody else. But basically, no income tax, replace income tax with tariffs. We talked about that yesterday. I just want to say a little bit more about that and the stupidity that constitutes, and just the cluelessness. The guy's clueless. Maybe we'll talk about some other stuff with Trump, including the fact that several former Trump employees in the White House from the previous presidency have now come out and said that they basically agree with what Kelly said. That, what he said makes sense, right on line. And of course, Trump is on Rogan as we speak. Rogan won't have me, but he'll take Trump. God, what is he thinking? Trump's on Rogan. I don't know when it's going to come out. Probably later tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. But that's kind of interesting. And finally, also regarding the election, we'll talk about we'll talk about newspaper endorsements, or the lack of. Some interesting stories where billionaires are putting their foot down regarding endorsements. All right, so before we get to that, I want to remind you that we have this event in Denver on November 7th about the election. It's going to be really interesting. I'll be there. It's called Beyond the Ballot, an evening with Yaron Brook and Tom Cranwitter. Tom is fantastic, and it's moderated by Mike Williams, who's also fantastic. You can still attend live, but more importantly, I think for most of you, you can do streaming. I think it would be great to have a lot of Yaron Brook show participants stream. The best way to get the link to both the live and the streaming events is to go to defenseofcapitalism.com. Defense of Capitalism, one word, defenseofcapitalism, one word, .com. There you will find the links to the event. The event is sponsored by the Defense of Capitalism program of the Leadership Program of the Rockies. And, you know, I'd appreciate it if you guys showed up on the not on the Super Chat, but $15 on the live stream and participated. It would be great to have you there. While the number of people live is limited, and we're very close to the limit, Super Chat, we can have as many as we want, so please consider doing that. So, yeah, defenseofcapitalism.com, defenseofcapitalism.com, one word. You can also go to yaronbrookshow.com. I think the information is there as well. All right. Let's talk about Israel for a minute. And I'm going to open up a window here just to keep track of the news, just in case the attack on Iran actually materializes, which could happen any minute now. There it is. There was a story earlier about explosions at Iran's defense ministry, but it turns out they were fake. So you know, who knows what's going to happen tonight? I don't know that Israel's actually going to attack. There is a headline in Twitter: reports Israel about to hit the Islamic Republic. Could write that every night, right? It is true that today the Islamic Republic, the head Khamenei, basically supreme leader, put the entire military force on war alert. And I saw a story that said that the Iranian Air Force has been ordered to be in the sky so they can shoot down Israeli airplanes as they approach. That's going to be fun to watch as the workhorse of the American and Israeli Air Force 50 years ago, the F-4 Phantom, which is a fantastic plane. And yeah, I mean, just an amazing plane, and did very, very well against the MiG-21s and MiG-23s and MiG-25s of old. It's just a classic, right? I mean, Israel used that plane in the 70s and 80s. Anyway, that is the, I think, most modern plane the Iranians have. As that workhorse of both the Israeli and American military goes up against F-16s, F-15s, and F-35s. I don't know. I mean, even if it was just F-4s Iranians versus F-4 Israelis, there would be no contest. But there's no contest, right, between whatever Iran can put up into the air and whatever Israel can put up in the air, even if Israel is very far from Iran, and Iran will focus all its firepower close to home. So, yeah, I feel sorry for the Iranian pilots. My assumption is that keep them on the ground, and they won't actually put them in the air. I would. Okay, let's shift now to an assessment of Israel's wars to date. And this came about because, you know, casualties still are coming in at almost a faster rate than I've seen other periods during the war, primarily from Lebanon, but also from northern Gaza. You know, the Israeli commanders, the Israeli chief of staff and others are declaring victory again, over and over and over again. That sounds familiar and suspicious. So I thought about it a little bit, and here's where we are right now, right? Israel is clearing out northern Gaza from Hamas for the third time in the last year. 6 months ago, 6+ months ago, Israeli chief of staff declared victory in northern Gaza. Hamas had been destroyed in northern Gaza and had lost all control in northern Gaza, and Israel basically controlled northern Gaza completely. turned out that was false. It turned out Israel had to go back to northern Gaza and kick them out in Gaza City and elsewhere. And now, further north in northern Gaza, Israel is slowly, first of all, there's still tens of thousands of civilians there. I thought they were all kicked out a long time ago. But now they're finally supposedly clearing the place out of civilians. And now they're really going to destroy Hamas in northern Gaza. But this is the third time. Why would we believe the third time is true? I mean, it reminds me of George W. Bush standing on the aircraft carrier in San Diego. I do not know how many of you remember this. Some of you are too young to remember. And declaring that, declaring basically victory in Iraq. Just as the Iraqi insurgency is about to take off and the U.S. starts losing significant numbers of soldiers and has to deploy more troops, and mission accomplished, George W. Bush said. And the stories coming out of Gaza remind me of that. Now, it's true, they've killed Sinwar. They've killed the entire leadership. But I've said this over and over and over again over the last year, and I can't believe it's already a year. But it's a year now, both based on the Latin calendar and the Jewish calendar. It's now a year since the horrors of October 7th. I've said this over and over again. Destroying leadership does not win a war. Not with Hamas and Hezbollah. Not even close. Israel's been killing leaders for decades. And yet, the leadership just gets resurrected. New people rise up. You cannot win that way. And Israel is not winning. I mean, some people thought, okay, Sinwar's dead. Now the Palestinians in Gaza will turn on Hamas and start basically handing over hostages and letting the Israelis know where the hostages are and maybe turning on Hamas itself. It just hasn't happened. It has not happened. And you see, if you follow social media, you'll see videos of Palestinians saying positive things about Israel and accusing Hamas of all kinds of things. Yeah, you can cherry pick those videos, but the reality is that Hamas still controls, I don't know if they control the hearts and minds, but they control the sentiments, and they control the expression, and they control the fear of the Palestinian people. Even without Sinwar, and even without 95% of the Hamas leadership wiped out, they still control the Gaza Strip. One of the main reasons humanitarian aid is in short supply among the civilians in Gaza is because Hamas keeps stealing it and using it for themselves and then selling it to the Gazans at inflated prices. So a year in, yeah, Gaza is being devastated. Yes, the Gaza Strip, on the Gaza Strip, there are no longer any missiles being launched into southern Israel, and that's an achievement. Once in a while, a missile gets launched, but it's pretty symbolic. It's not representative. So there's a lot more peace in the southern border, and that's a good thing. Hamas is a lot weaker. Of the 40,000 active members, maybe half or more are dead, and many injured. But then how many have been recruited since? They'll recruit 15-year-olds. So they have no problem recruiting new people. I don't know. What I do know is that Israeli officers, soldiers, keep dying in northern Gaza. A tank just rolled off some kind of mine, some kind of device, and 3 of the tank crew of 4 were killed. Must have been a pretty sophisticated device, because tanks, particularly Israeli tanks, are really good at shielding their people. I don't know how whatever was used managed to penetrate and kill 3 of the 4. Maybe it was underneath, which is maybe a soft spot. But, the armor of the Merkava tank, the Israeli tanks, is geared towards protecting the soldiers within, and it's been incredibly potent and successful. Very few tankers have died inside their tanks. Now they did. And this is, of course, after a few days ago, where 3 senior, very, very senior tank commanders died after they exited the tank and walked into a device that exploded under their feet. They're still there, Hamas. They're still drawing blood. They're still intimidating their own people. They're still refusing to give the hostages. Hostages are still there. 100 haven't discovered any new ones, haven't rescued anybody, haven't seen any Hamas or Gazans hand them over peacefully. There was hope after Sinwar died. Didn't happen. And that means Hamas still have a stranglehold on these people. Now, there's a variety of reasons why it is that Israel has not won yet. And many of them have to do with the soft touch, I would call it, that they have used in dealing with the Gazan population while destroying their homes and destroying the infrastructure. Well, some of the infrastructure. They still feed them. They still protect them. They provide them with internet, electricity, water, polio vaccines. And they allow Hamas to work within. Once in a while they'll bomb, they'll kill some Hamas, and they keep doing that. And for all I know, they'll be doing this 10 years from now. I don't think that'll happen, but I don't know. I mean, what's the end of this? Where's the end of this? Is there going to be a deal? The deal would just solidify Hamas's power, unless the deal has Hamas leave the Gaza Strip, and then they'll try to influence the Gaza Strip from outside. I just don't see the positive solution here, the positive ending of this. Yeah, I don't know. So that is Gaza. Let's shift to Lebanon, to Hezbollah. In Lebanon, we've seen we've seen the best of the unbelievable, amazing capabilities of the IDF. The beeper, the walkie-talkie explosions, the accurate killing of Nasrallah, and then within a few days, the killing of Nasrallah's replacement, the destruction of Hezbollah's massive arsenal. In Beirut and outside of Beirut. I mean, it's truly amazing, although you have to take into account one thing. Israel has complete control of the air. No airplanes are challenging Israel. And Hezbollah and Hamas have no anti-aircraft capabilities. None that can match Israel's planes and Israel's electronic warfare. So it basically is shooting fish in a barrel. Now, you have to know where the fish are. It's not exactly a barrel. Barrel's kind of, it's hard to find the fish. But so Israel's intelligence is amazing. But they've got complete air superiority. I mean, complete. And yet, every day, between 100 and 200 missiles and drones are fired from Lebanon into Israel, Haifa, even Tel Aviv. A few of them drop. Missiles that many of these missiles cost, I don't know, let's say $100,000. And yet, in order to knock them down, Israel uses projectiles that might cost $1 million. So Israel is knocking down a lot of these projectiles that are entering, and the damage has been relatively minimal, although there have been deaths. But it's costing Israel unbelievable quantities of money. It could bankrupt the state of Israel. Without American support, it very well might. Hundreds of these rockets every single day, in spite of the massive military superiority of the Israelis, and in spite of all the successes Israel's had. Now, this is just sheer weakness. Weakness of ambition, weakness of imagination, and maybe just a lack of enough forces. Right? Maybe they just don't have enough soldiers. Because what I would have expected is that the day after they killed Nasrallah, and when they've got everybody shaken up, and where really, the entire leadership of Hezbollah is in tatters, you'd expect a massive Israeli invasion of Lebanon, which would destroy, as it moved through Lebanon in force, all the infrastructure, all the soldiers, the Hezbollah soldiers, and just bring devastation, certainly to the south of Lebanon, but potentially all the way up to Beirut. Instead, what we've seen is Israel go in, little missions into the border area. Yes, they've destroyed a lot of tunnels. Yes, they've captured a lot of ammunition, destroyed a lot of missiles, destroyed a lot of villages, brought havoc to the immediate region bordering Israel. But they have not, other than from the air, strategically defeated Hezbollah. They have not pushed them all the way to the Litani, which is, I think, a conservative policy. They should go further north than that. Today, they're again giving the Lebanese a list. Here are the buildings you should evacuate in West Berlin. The buildings are evacuated. Israel bombs them. They collapse. They're destroyed. Whatever's underneath the building is destroyed. Good. But so far, and maybe this has to continue for a year before you get consequences. So far, that again has not stopped Hezbollah from launching between 100 and 200 missiles into Israel every single day. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe this does take a year or two. Now, yesterday, the Israeli commander, the Israeli, head of the top general in the Israeli army, said that, we're almost done in Lebanon. We're on the verge of victory there. Really? Really? Again, Israeli soldiers every single day are dying over there. Another 5, I think, today. Victory? I don't see victory in Lebanon. I see a lot of success. A lot of, good intelligence. I don't see victory. I don't see Hamas devastated. I don't see Hezbollah, devastated. I don't see them. There was a time after the beepers and the Nasrallah and the bombings where they really looked like they were in tatters. They've come back. They've reorganized. I'm sure the Iranians are willing to send a lot of money over there to get them back on their feet, if you will. So, again, I just don't see the victory. I don't see the winning. I see isolated success, and I don't see victory. I don't see Hezbollah eviscerated, destroyed, collapsing, giving up. I see missiles and Israeli dead bodies. And victory is within reach in both Gaza and Lebanon. Now, but Israel will not take the steps to do it. And again, I'm going to say, this is Netanyahu. Maybe it's more than Netanyahu. Maybe it's Israeli society more broadly, but it's certainly Netanyahu. It's a lack of imagination. It's a lack of guts. It's a lack of decisiveness. It's a lack of vision. It's a lack of commitment to victory beyond words. Words are cheap. I mean, it's as if Netanyahu and the Israeli military think that people will see what geniuses they are, like with the beepers and other things. Hezbollah will say, wow, these Israelis are amazing. Look what they just did to us. Okay, we give up. It's not going to happen. Now, add to that the fact that the world is slowly, systematically turning against Israel, that the International Criminal Court is probably going to rule against Israel, that if Kamala Harris wins, it's going to be a much tougher go for Israel from an international perspective. If Trump wins, who the F knows what'll happen? So it's very troublesome. It's very troublesome. Israel should have won by now. It should have won months ago. It should have defeated its enemies months ago. And yet, nothing. Its enemies are still around, still fighting, still killing, still in command of their own forces and, to some extent, their own destinies. And finally, of course, there is the issue of Iran, which is at the, we know, basically at the heart of what is going on in the Middle East. Iran, which is, you know, if as long as it is alive and well and is funding terrorism and perceived as strong and active, there is no solution, not to Hamas and not to Hezbollah. And if there is, then Iran will just fund their replacements. Iran is the one regime that has to be destroyed, the one country that has to be defeated. And Israel just dithers. I mean, how long does it take to launch a strike against Iran? I mean, you knew this was coming. Again, planning. Where's the planning? Where's the execution? Where's the just do it? I get the U.S. Can't blame the U.S. for everything. Can't blame the U.S. for everything. It's true the U.S. controls airspace in Jordan, Iraq, and Arabia, but Israel has and will and could and should launch its attack through Syria and northern Iraq. And what are the Americans going to do at the end of the day? Shoot down Israeli planes? Unlikely. Where is it? Where's the attack on Iraq? Maybe happening now. I don't know. A little late? And maybe too little? And what message does this send? And are we going to now enter a retracted, prolonged, tit-for-tat war with Iran, where they send missiles and Israel attacks, and they send missiles and Israel attacks, all while Israel still has to deal with Hezbollah and Hamas? Now, let's be clear. The reason the United States, by the way, is sending vast numbers of airplanes and ships into the Middle East, and it has beefed up its F-16s, F-35s in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia, and is massively beefing up its personnel in the Middle East, is not because of Israel, not because in order to defend Israel. Basically, the United States has told the Saudis, don't worry, if the Iranians attack you, we will defend you. The United States is building up its arsenal within the Arabian Peninsula in order to defend Saudi Arabia and UAE from the Iranians. And the only, I think, circumstances in which the United States would actually attack Iran is if Saudi Arabia and UAE are attacked. They won't attack Iran because Israel's attacked. Let the Israelis deal with that. It's the Saudis and the UAE. And at what point do the Saudis decide that Israel's a nuisance? and convey that to Donald Trump as president. Just one potential scenario. Anyway, more American planes were seen flying into the Saudi Arabian Air Force Base today, coming from Europe. So they beefed it up even more significantly. So we now have, there's a lot of U.S. airplanes, a lot of Air Force, and a lot of Navy aviation, and a lot of just Navy boats with ballistic missiles right there. In the Middle East. Would it be used? You know, maybe to defend the Saudis. All right, so Israel's not winning. It's not losing. It's succeeding locally, but it's not winning. And that could land up being historically an incredible historic tragedy. All right, that is what I have to say about Israel. Just looking quickly at the questions. Neo says, why do you say that Israel can't manufacture its own jet, munitions, bombs? Do they not have the economy resources to do so? I mean, they're manufacturing a jet and then keeping it up to speed and making sure that it stays cutting edge and best in class. I mean, it requires gazillions of dollars. I mean, look at the F-35 and the cost of that project. Israel can't afford a project like that. It doesn't have the resources. And then, now, it could export, it could sell to other countries, but who does it want to sell to? And it's limited number of people who Israel will sell these weapons to. But just development, think of the hundreds of billions of dollars, that maybe trillions of dollars, I don't know, that Israel has, that U.S. has spent on the F-35 program. And they can build to scale, because they can build lots of airplanes, because the U.S. Air Force will buy them, and then sell them to lots of other countries like Israel. Israel doesn't have that capability. It doesn't have that money. And then it probably has the engineering capabilities. And as I said, about 20 years ago, they were on the verge of building their own jet fighter. They decided against it ultimately. Maybe that was a mistake. But that jet fighter would have not been an F-35. It would have been more like a F-16, which is a previous generation. And now this talk, in China certainly, in the United States, South Korea is working on a plane with a number of other allies, about a fifth-generation airplane, which is the next iteration after the F-35, which is a fourth-generation airplane. I just don't think Israel has the money to keep up with that. It's a tiny little country. 9.4 million people live in it. Now, munitions, bombs, yeah, again, you need economies of scale. It can produce munitions, and it does, but those munitions are incredibly expensive because of economies of scale. They don't have them. And if you're talking about, I don't know, things that are used in the thousands, or hundreds of thousands, like artillery shells or bullets or things like that, Israel just doesn't have the capabilities. Now, it does have an assault rifle. It probably, I don't know if it produces bullets for the assault rifle. It does have its own assault rifle. I forget the name. It has had an assault rifle really from very early on, from the old days of the Uzi, and then the Galil, and I don't know what the current name is. But you know, those are cheap items, and you can build them, I guess. Liam says, does it make sense for Israel to resettle Gaza with Israeli settlers like they do in the West Bank? No, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, what makes sense for Israel is to find a way to give Gaza to the Egyptians or to depopulate Gaza. I mean, one thing Israel could do, which I think would be incredibly valuable, is they could buy like a few big boats and just have them drift to the Gazan coast, close to where all those displaced Gazans are living in tents. I mean, accidentally. They could just drift in that direction and let the Gazans take it from there. And then they can sail from there to Egypt, Libya, Algeria, or to Europe, and let them handle it. You know, unless Israel's willing to do the unthinkable, which is to really defeat the Palestinians, which involves a lot of casualties on the Palestinian side. The only other solution is to at least reduce the number of population, reduce the population. Maybe Israel could accidentally, very accidentally, not on purpose at all, maybe it could bomb the fence between Gaza and Egypt. Just accidentally make a few holes in the fence and make this an Egyptian problem. All right. But no, I mean, you got 2 million Palestinians. How many Israelis are going to put there? How are they going to defend themselves? How are they going to prevent an October 7th-like event where they just overrun? No, I mean, no. That should not happen. All right. China, Europe, U.S. economy quickly. China's in deep trouble. It doesn't get a lot of press in the United States. It doesn't get a lot of coverage, partially because it's far, far away, partially because it's hard to understand. It's not that interesting, and partially because political leaders have a strong incentive to keep China as the enemy, perceived strong and powerful, so that we can rile against them. If China was perceived as, real economic problems, real problems within, collapsing economy, maybe they wouldn't be such a threat. And then, half the fear-mongering that both Democrats and Republicans engaged in would be irrelevant. So there's a lot of incentive, and again, there's complexity, and there's a lot of ignorance, and of course, China keeps reporting 4 to 5% GDP growth, which is bad, relatively low for China, but relative to the United States, much faster. But of course, you have to believe the numbers to do that. It would also cause, the left would have to think about its economic model, because they've admired China's economic model for so long that they would have to completely reconsider it. And that's a problem and something they don't really want to do. So there's no incentive in the West to come to terms with the fact that China is struggling economically. And it's still a production powerhouse. It's still a big exporter. It still has a lot of potential. But the reality is that it is struggling. There's a massive quantity of debt. Chinese have a lot of their wealth tied up in real estate, which is plummeting in value. Some of that real estate was never completed in terms of building. Local governments in China, city governments and district kind of governments, basically bankrupt. They've taken on massive amounts of debt and build up big infrastructure projects, which all contribute, by the way, to GDP growth. but they have no mechanism by which to pay back the debt. A lot of that, they used to pay back the debt by selling land for real estate development, but nobody's developing real estate anymore in China because the real estate market is basically in a depression. Chinese consumers are not spending. The Chinese economy is really struggling. Innovation startups are down. Tech, Chinese 10 years ago were real innovators in tech. That's struggling. It's not happening. Primarily because the private companies within the tech space have been squeezed because Xi doesn't like private companies. So China's struggling right now, and indeed Xi, there's some opposition within the Chinese Communist Party to Xi's leadership as a consequence. There's real angst within China right now. There are real challenges. The Chinese people have not risen up, but that's because things haven't got quite bad enough. A war with Taiwan might actually occur, not so much because the Chinese finally figured out that they could win or the Americans are weak, but because they might want to distract their people from the dire state of their own economy. That's often why wars break out, so authoritarians can distract their population. Xi keeps doubling down on central planning, on centralized control, on clamping down on entrepreneurs. There is a hollowing out of the finance industry in China because, for example, Xi announced that can't have bonuses for finance people. They make too much money and bonuses. So, a lot of people are not making, they used to make a lot of money in finance. They don't anymore, so they're leaving finance. And that's to the detriment. Finance is an important area, which anybody who understands markets understands, but the Chinese government does not. So, as a response, China is trying to get its economy going. They've cut interest rates. They are engaged in a massive bailout of the housing sector. They're engaged in a massive bailout, not yet clear how big, of the, local government sector. So there's a lot of bailout money going around all over China in an attempt to deal with what is going on. Of course, the advice they're getting from the West, this is typical. What does the West advise China to do? The West is saying, your real problem is that the bailout is not big enough. So you've got Keynesians and neo-Keynesians and Marxists but statists all around arguing about how big the bailout should be and how much central planning they should engage in. And the consequence of that, again, are not good for China. China is a declining power. And add to that, the massive demographic shift that's happening in China. The pace at which China is aging, which is significantly faster than Japan aged. So the number of people working in Japan, that are of working age, is shrinking. Number of old people growing. Who's going to feed them? So you've got a massive collapse in the demographics on top of everything else. So yeah, that's where we are. China's in big trouble. Europe is stagnating. With the exception maybe of Poland, Western Europe certainly, is not growing. Germany continues to flirt with 0% growth, negative growth some quarters. All the regulations, all the taxes, all the redistribution, all the promises to old people that the Europeans have engaged in for decades and decades are coming home to roost. And a little bit like China, population is shrinking. Particularly population of young people is shrinking. Population of old people exploding. In other words, population of recipients of welfare exploding. Population of people paying taxes shrinking. And population of entrepreneurs, we're bringing out the Microsoft. We're bringing out the microscope in order to try to find a few in Europe. Europe is in big, big trouble, and the big, big trouble is not going to go away. It's only going to get worse. As again, the population ages, and there are no young people. And more importantly, there are no entrepreneurs. There's no innovation. There's no new stuff. We're seeing report after report after report coming out of Europe to show how far they've fallen behind. But more than that, so there's a IMF now on Thursday came out, sounded the alarm about the continent's lack of business dynamism. The IMF said its latest economic outlook for Europe that an aging workforce and low productivity growth would reduce the continent's annual GDP growth rate for the 10 years until 2029 to just 1.45%. In the US, the average growth rate over the same period is estimated at 2.29%. US growth has outpaced Europe since the global financial crisis, particularly since COVID-19. I'm reading this from a story in the Financial Times. And now, the difference between 1.45 and 2.29 is substantial, particularly if it's year in, year out over time. Europe is stagnating. And that makes it very difficult for Europe to support a war in Ukraine. It makes it very difficult for Europe to raise revenue, to build up a military force to protect itself against Russian aggression. And again, without innovation, without productivity growth, which requires innovation, where does Europe go? Where does Europe go? I mean, there are better places in Europe, worse places in Europe, but generally, Europe is in trouble. On the other hand, the United States, of the three places, is in best shape, surprisingly. It still has a relatively flexible workforce and workforce regulations relative to Europe. Regulation with regard to innovation is far, far less restrictive in the United States than it is in Europe. In other ways, Europe is less regulated than the US, but in terms of innovation, things that matter primarily, not everything matters. The US does not regulate tech, IP, so far. Its regulations on, AI are pretty loose as compared to the Europeans, and of course, antitrust regulations far, far, far worse in Europe than in the United States, and this has enormous consequences. Now, who knows what growth rates in the United States are going to be once this election is over? Now, as you know, Trump has promised, or Trump is flirting with the idea of replacing the entire income tax with tariffs, which is the way the U.S. government was funded before 1913. Before 1913, there was no income tax. It required a constitutional amendment to get an income tax, and the entire federal government was funded through tariffs. So why can't we do that again, Yaron? That seems brilliant. Well, one big difference, I said yesterday, is that before 1913, the United States federal government didn't need a lot of money. Basically, it spent about 3% of GDP. Today, it spends about 23% of GDP. 23% of GDP. So, yeah, you could probably fund 3% of GDP with tariffs. Maybe. But you cannot fund 23% of tariffs. And as I said yesterday, and I keep saying, and I'll have to say it, I guess, throughout the Trump administration for 4 years, tariffs are taxes paid by Americans, 1. 2, the higher the tax rate is, the less imports there are, and therefore the smaller the amount of revenue you get. Yes, manufacturing comes back home, but prices are dramatically higher. And the real impact of very high tariffs is a lower standard of living. A lower standard of living, a lower quality of life. No, it's not a Laffer curve. It's much more dramatic than a Laffer curve. I guess there is a curve there, but it's much more dramatic. Because at 100% tariffs, everything is double. Suddenly, I'm not importing anything, 0. And I go and buy stuff locally for a lot more than I used to. But, that's just life. What can I do? Everything's now more expensive because I've unshored it. I brought it back home. Wages go down. Productivity goes down. Productivity will come down if we onshore. Wages will come down if we onshore. And who's going to do the work? Where are all these workers just waiting to do the work? Now, if you have a sales tax and you tax all goods equally, that could replace income tax. So Trump is actually flirting with this. He's actually talking about this. But again, it's shocking how economically ignorant he is, and the extent to which his advisors either afraid to tell him how ignorant he is, or ignorant too. And it's quite possible that they too are completely and utterly ignorant, or just maybe they are they just don't care. They know how stupid it is. And they just don't care. They think it's a winning idea. So why the hell care about whether it's doable or not? Also, something we talked about yesterday. Remember, I did a whole rant yesterday or the day before about General Kelly and his comments on Trump, and how badly he thought of Trump and how awful he thought Trump was, and all the horrible things Trump said about soldiers. And of course, Trump said, "Oh, none of that's true," and all the MAGA people are denying it. Well, today a letter was released, signed by a bunch of Trump White House people, confirming or seconding all of what Kelly said. Again, these are Republicans saying this. These are people who are Republicans. So, yeah, I mean, Donald Trump is a horrible, horrible, horrible human being. And I think everybody who worked for him knows that. And that's why most of the people, I think an overwhelming majority of the people who worked for him, don't want him to win again. Right? Don't want him to win again, which is pretty shocking. And what's even more shocking is the fact that nobody pays attention to that. Finally, for the Trump segment, Trump is going to be interviewed today by Joe Rogan. I expect a very friendly interview, in spite of differences they might have. Joe Rogan has, in the past, endorsed Bernie Sanders. He also is a huge fan of RFK's, but I guess RFK now endorsed Trump, so maybe that extends to Trump. Maybe once it's released, I'll look at it and maybe we can comment on it. I'm not sure it's worth it, but if there's anything interesting and new that comes out of it, we can look at it. All right, finally, a quick story on our newspapers. 2 newspapers today, the LA Times and the Washington Post. Both have announced that they will not endorse a candidate this election. both editorial boards of the LA Times and the Washington Post were ready, on the verge of, endorsing Kamala Harris. And in both cases, the billionaire owners of the papers, I forget the name of the owner of the LA Times, it's a Chinese name, and of course the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, killed the endorsement and said, no, we're not going to endorse anybody. Now that's huge. One, it suggests, I think, that people are very fearful that Donald Trump will win. And they're very fearful of what he might do, particularly Jeff Bezos, who's been threatened by Trump on many occasions, is like, he might win. Let's not upset him by endorsing Kamala Harris. Let's just stay out of it this time. Just stay out of it. And of course, same thing in the LA Times. Now, in the LA Times, 3 people in the editorial board have already resigned because of this. They've endorsed candidates, I'd say, for the last 12 years, maybe even before that, but not this election. The billionaire owner is either a Trump fan and doesn't want the paper to endorse somebody he's opposed to, or is just afraid of Trump, which would be worse. So that is, you could say the media is already being silenced by Trump. But Trump is the advocate for free speech. He's the free speech guy. Him and RFK believe strongly in free speech. We will see. We will see. Unfortunately, there's a good chance he wins, and we will find out how strong of a free speech advocate he really is. Oh, by the way, Ryan declared earlier, much earlier, an hour ago, that today was $5 Sticker Friday. So let's do $5 Sticker Fridays, guys. $5 Sticker Friday. You do a $5 sticker, and we chip away at the goal. That would be great, because we're way off the goal. So it would be nice if we could chip away at the goal with the $5 Sticker Friday. Jump in and help us out here. Last story, I think. Yeah, this will be the last story. It's a positive story. SpaceX brought the 2 astronauts from the space station back home safely. So you remember the astronauts that were stranded on the space station because everybody was afraid of the Boeing rocket and whether it could bring back people, right? So what is going on? I don't know what that is. Anyway, SpaceX to the rescue. Boeing took the crew up there. They decided it wasn't safe enough to bring them back. 6 months later or 5 months later or whatever it is, SpaceX went out there and brought the astronauts back. That's a huge achievement. It's really cool. Good for them. They splashed down today and completely safe. Okay, a correction for something I said yesterday on the Yaron Brook Show. We do corrections. If I say something that is off, I try, if I'm reminded, to correct it. See, yesterday I said, somebody pointed out that Ayn Rand said that she didn't invest in stocks because she didn't have the time, the knowledge to investigate the company before making an investment. And I said, I don't think that's true. I think she primarily didn't invest in stocks because they were too risky. It turns out there is a quote from Catherine Eickhoff. Catherine Eickhoff was a financier, an investment manager. She is still alive, actually. She's still alive, I think in her 90s. And she was actually worked with Alan Greenspan, and Catherine actually inherited Alan Greenspan's business, money management business, when Alan Greenspan started getting involved more, I guess, when he went to the Fed. Anyway, Catherine Eickhoff says in a book called 100 Voices, which are interviews about Ayn Rand, you can buy this book on Amazon, quote, at the time, she did say she didn't want to invest in equities because then she would have to investigate the company and the people who ran the company and whether they were taking government subsidies or things of that sort. She didn't have time to do that. That's in page 276 if you're interested. Thank you for whoever sent me this correction. I appreciate that. I have that book somewhere here, but I don't see it quickly. Okay. I mean, I believe that. Catherine Eickhoff, I think, is a reliable source. I know Catherine. But, I mean, I don't use that criteria. I can't. There's almost every company in America today gets something from the government. Subsidies are so widespread. So many of the CEOs are politically and philosophically bad guys. So I don't think that could be a criteria for investing today. There's a handful of companies one would invest in, and that would be it. So, I also do remember, again, but from a different financial advisor to Ayn Rand, that she invested in government bonds. Well, government was using these bonds to raise revenue to spend on programs Ayn Rand didn't believe in. And yet, most of her portfolio was in government bonds, and that she was in that because it was safe. And that's what I was told. If you guys want to try to invest based on these criteria in the world in which we live, yeah, good luck. I don't think you can. I think it's suicidal to try. Plus, as I've said many times, in terms of investment, for almost all of you, the best thing is basically to diversify. All right. So that is my correction for what I said yesterday. And we will call that the news for this October 25th. All right, let's jump into the Super Chat. I'll remind you, the Super Chats are a way to support the show. It's a way to, keep the show going. I'm funded through contributions by people like you. And I'll add to that if you want to support the show on a monthly basis, you can do so by supporting the show on Patreon and on PayPal. To do it on PayPal, you can go to yaronbrookshow.com. Generally, go to yaronbrookshow.com. It's a new website. You can find my speaking schedule on there. You can find information about how to support the show on a monthly basis. Check out yaronbrookshow.com. New website. Let me know what it looks, if you like it, how it looks, and all of that. All right, let's jump into the Super Chats. Bunch of $20 Super Chats. I like it. We are, let's see. We are $20 short of the first hour goal and $270 short of the second hour goal. So see what you can do to improve that situation. All right, John says, here's to reaching your goal today, Yaron. Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks, John. Thomas says, is Flying Emirates, owned by the government of Dubai, Investment Corporation of Dubai, moral, or given the UAE government support of Hamas, etc.? Is it support of Islamic terrorism and thus a sanction of evil? Look, I do not fly Emirates. Now, Emirates are They have a peace deal with Israel. They have relations with Israel. So Emirates is not as evil as, let's say, Qatar or Kuwait or some of these other places. But I wouldn't fly them even that. Again, it's really, to try to go in and figure out the philosophy and the position of every CEO with which you deal, and to figure out which one is sanctioning what is very difficult. Now, if you discover that they're sanctioning evil, disengage. Again, I wouldn't fly in Emirates. I don't fly in Qatar Air. I don't fly in any of the Arab airlines, even though supposedly you get the best service in the world and they have the best business class seats and first class seats in the world. I will not fly because I won't sanction them, and I don't have anything to do with them, even though supposedly they're at peace with Israel. But you have to make that call yourself. Morality is about you making those kind of decisions, about where you're going to sanction or where you're not, because to avoid dealing with anybody who has any kind of dealings with evil is almost impossible. So you gotta figure out where your line is. You should have a line in the sand, but you have got to figure out where that line in the sand is. Not your average algorithm. Should the objectivist movement just accept the growth, slow growth? All these pie-in-the-sky ideas about speeding up the process are a waste of time. No. Shouldn't accept slow growth. Bring on the ideas. There are lots of ideas out there. We've tried a lot of them. We still get slow growth. So there's no shortage of eagerness to try new ideas. They have to be reasonable ideas. They have to be ideas that we believe will actually lead to faster growth. They have to be ideas that don't compromise the philosophy. And they have to be ideas that are doable. And bring them on. I'd love to have an idea about how to grow objectivism fast. And they have to be ideas we haven't tried already. But in the 17 years I was CEO of ARI, we tried lots and lots and lots of ideas. Many of them we thought were going to lead to really fast growth. And some of those led to short-term growth, and some of them led to long-term growth, but nothing led to the kind of accelerated growth that we would all love to see. Nobody at the Ayn Rand Institute is settled, just accepted slow growth. Just not part of the DNA there. Thomas Schubert. Capitalism was a term invented by Marx, meaning rule of moneyed interests. Rand used it to mean a society with rule of law, individual rights, and free markets. How does one decide which one is the right definition? Because when you look at the concretes that Marx was using in trying to define capitalism, that is, if you look at the world he was observing, and he was very observant, if you look at what he was observing and what he could see, then what that all represented was the defense of individual rights, a society moving towards defending individual rights and economic liberty, economic freedom, property rights. That's literally what Marx could see around him. And he called it capitalism and then misintegrated it into, oh, that's just money interests. But I'm not even sure he believed that. But the phenomena he was observing was not just rule of moneyed interest. It was the rule of individual rights. So that's how you know. And Marx is very observant in terms of the success of capitalism, which Marxists today had half the appreciation of capitalism that Marx had. Sebastian. Whoops, what am I doing? Going in the wrong direction. Sebastian says, in debates on how regulations stifle innovation, it often becomes too abstract. Could you suggest books, papers that explain how regulations decrease growth and give concrete examples, preferably books that we haven't heard about? God, you guys always ask me for specific books, and I'm not good at this. I'm not good at it. I don't remember. Send me an email, and then I can search for the books, right? I can search for the books and dig them out and write them out. But, you know, I'm just thinking right now that there was a article recently in the New York Times, of all places, about the differences between regulation of elevators in the United States and regulation of elevators in Europe, and how regulations of elevators in the United States made elevators, made it so that there are fewer elevators than there used to be. So you can find lots of examples like that where specific regulations, there's an article about that shows that they just don't work. You can look at Thomas Sowell's book on economics has some good examples. But this elevator article in the New York Times, which wasn't trying to even be pro-free markets, but it turned out it showed that American regulation of elevators were just debilitating, and Europe had a much looser regulatory regime, and they had a lot more elevators. But I'm just scanning my bookshelf right now. It's not very effective to do it this way. You'll have to write me an email, Yaron@yaronbookshow.com. Yaron@yaronbookshow.com. Andrew Traeger, Trump is on the premise of being oppositional, not cooperative. It's the natives against the immigrants, the U.S. against the world. It's not the mindset of a trader. And while putatively patriotic, not pro-American. Yeah, absolutely. Trump is on a zero-sum premise. He's on a negative-sum premise. So he is, committed to the idea of winners and losers in everything. And he wants to be the winner, and he wants to cause losses on the other side. So yes, he is the most zero-sum mentality that I've met, that I've not met because I haven't met him, that I am familiar with, that expresses themselves. It's truly unbelievable how zero-sum Donald Trump really is. And a lot of that came out last election more than it's coming out this election. Richard, hi. My first question, thank you. Thank you. This is first Super Chat question. Really appreciate it. I have a vote in UK, the Conservative Party leadership election next week. But I don't know who to vote for. Kemi or Robert Jenrick. A month ago, I was keen for Kemi. Now I'm not sure. So I haven't followed that election very closely. So I don't know what has happened over the last month to make you less excited about Kemi. All I know is that I met Kemi years ago. I did an event with her where we were on a panel at a conference where we were defending capitalism against a bunch of socialists. And that I thought she was very good. And she was very interested in my ideas and expressed a lot of positivity regarding Ayn Rand and was very good on capitalism. So from that, I have developed a very positive attitude towards Kemi. I think at least on the issue of capitalism, she gets it. She understands it. Now, whether she might have softened her approach because she thinks she's too radical to win, I don't know. So I haven't followed the actual election process that's going on. But if I were you, I don't know Robert Jenrick, but I don't think he's as free market as Kemi is. So what I would do is I'd give Kemi a chance. I would vote for her. She'll probably disappoint. That wouldn't be new. They all disappoint. But maybe she won't. Maybe she won't. She comes from a starting point that is better than anybody else in British politics that I know of. So I would vote for her. I would vote for her. Andrew, the letters, 100 Voices and Rand's journals, are a great way to get to know her. Her reason and emotions complemented each other so well. Why do you think emotions and reasons are typically conceived of as oppositional? Well, because for most people, they don't understand where their emotions come from. And for most people, they are. Reason tells them you should do X, but their emotions, shaped by altruism and mysticism, tell them to do something completely different. And they're constantly in opposition. Their mind and their emotion. Their mind might tell them about the long term, but their emotions have been shaped by a instant gratification mentality, and they can't defend reason to themselves. So it's the prevalence of altruism and mysticism in the culture that results in a conflict between emotions and reason, which leads to a mind-body dichotomy, a view that the mind and the body are in opposition. The body wants pleasure and the mind wants sacrifice. Reason demands sacrifice. The body wants selfishness, pleasure, and that is in conflict. And so you can see how you get a oppositional perspective. Ryan says, $5 Sticker Friday is here. It didn't stick. The Sticker Friday didn't stick. Bradley did $20 sticker. Thank you. Brady, not Bradley. Brady did a $20 sticker. Really, really appreciate that. A few $20 stickers would be really, really cool right now. Would help a lot to get to our goal. Steph, thank you. Martin, thank you. These are all stickers. Oyvind, thank you. Nevfell, thank you for the sticker. So thank you guys for supporting the show. And of course, Ryan doing the $5, two Friday $5 stickers to get us all started. So please consider doing a sticker to get us at least closer to the goal for the second hour. All right, Jacob, I'm glad you called out PBD on his ridiculous referral tariffs analogy. I always tag you as his next guest. He needs an Econ 101 refresher. Yeah, he definitely needs that. Thank you for tagging me. Hopefully one day he'll call. Liam says, does the Christian right not hate communism because it was totalitarian and poverty-inducing, but because it was godless? Yeah, I think the main reason was it's godless. They also, the religious right in America is unique in that it thinks that its religiosity is linked to freedom and liberty. And they also hate the Soviet Union because of its totalitarianism. So it's a combination. Godlessness and totalitarianism, which in their mind now is connected. Godlessness leads to totalitarianism. And only Christianity gives us, America, freedom. A massive mistake that is reinforced by Christian nationalist philosophers, intellectuals. Anonymous user. I think you would like some of the reporting from Alex Hollings. I need to look for that. He does a lot of aerospace defense, international relations, and technology. I think I've looked at him, and I think I do like him, but it hasn't stuck. Let me copy paste that and see if I can find him. Look him up again. Thank you, anonymous user. Frank, when engaged in a war, it is better to play chess, knock out the leadership, or play checkers, where you take out the whole board, which brings victory. Well, I mean, if you're knocking out the whole board, you knock out the leadership as well. So knock out the whole board, absolutely. Simon, does a show on the discussion of Dawkins and Jordan Peterson? Yeah, I want to do one. I need to take little segments because I can't do for the whole thing. But yes, I want to do one. I just need to find the time to watch it and think about it. Henry, hi, Yaron. Have you managed to arrange to see Kemi when you come to the UK? Looks like she will win the Tory leadership next week. Doesn't seem as strong on Israel as Jenrick. Thoughts? Again, I don't know. I just don't know. I haven't tried to arrange a meeting because I'm not going to be in the UK long enough to really do anything. Maybe when I come back in the spring. I don't know why she's not strong in Israel. That is a little strange, but maybe we can fix that. I don't think you should vote based on Israel. You should vote based on capitalism, and I think she's strong in capitalism. Again, I haven't been following the Jenrick's Kemi debate, so I don't know what they're strong and what they're weak on. Philosophy at Work says, Mary Benz, life is like a hurricane for the Secret Service since the failed assassination attempt on Trump. Their new strategy to protect him is called Operation Donald Duck. That's pretty clever. All right, I get that. Sometimes I don't get them. This one I got. Christian, last question for the day. How do we know that Kelly said the truth about Trump? I would prefer recordings or documentations as real proof. Meanwhile, we have a document proving negligence in the case of the Iran spy. Well, people have come forward and affirmed the Kelly story. All of them Republican. Kelly's stories about Trump are very consistent, but different than the stories John Bolton said about Trump. God, I mean, there's so much. I mean, if you look at what Mathis has said about Trump, if you look about what McMaster has said about Trump, these are all the generals. If you look about what a number of defense secretaries have said about Trump, it's all basically consistent with Kelly. Not to the word, not to the letter, but in spirit. So, do I know for sure that the specific accusation that Kelly is making towards Trump is true? No. Although, again, a number of people formerly in the administration have confirmed that they confirmed what Kelly heard. But, you know, in broader terms, the character of Trump is known to us, and other people within the national security establishment basically confirmed similar things to what Kelly has said. That's as good as it gets. Good as it gets. Finn Harper says, I once tried to write a theatrical piece on puns, but it turned out to be just a play on words. Clever. Clever. All right. Thank you, Fred Harper. All right, guys. Appreciate the support. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Super Chatters. Tomorrow is Ask Me Anything Day with our panel and everything. So see you all tomorrow, 2 p.m. East Coast time. And Ask Me Anything with a panel, 2 p.m. East Coast time tomorrow. See you all there. Bye, everybody.